Good afternoon, everyone. It's just after 12 noon on Thursday, the 8th of April. My name's Mark Harris, and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. Now, over the last 8 weeks, we've been looking at what the new post-COVID world's going to look like for travel managers, intermediaries, and suppliers. And we've been privileged to draw on the insights and knowledge of some true industry thought leaders. Today's webinar is the last in the current series, although we'll be back with another series in September. Today's topic is Out of Adversity, and it's brought to you by TIN in association with International Hospitality Media and the BTA. Very shortly, we're going to be asking whether the pandemic is driving innovation in the accommodation sector, and if so, what that accommodation will look like. Where will the opportunities be for startups, and how will more established providers react? But before that, let me take just a couple of minutes to draw your attention to a few items. Our colleagues at IHM will be hosting a drinks evening on the 7th of July for travel buyers at Tobacco Dock in London. This is part of our Engage programme for travel managers, which has been compiled by them, accommodation and urban living innovators. You'll all be very, very welcome, and you can find details of how to book on the IHM website. Now, these events couldn't take place without the support of our sponsors, who are shown on your screen. Finally, if you like what you see today, at Travel Intelligence Network, we now offer a full or menu-driven service to create and deliver webinars for suppliers and intermediaries. We provide content of all kinds, from blogs to podcasts, white papers to sector reports. So if you'd like to refresh your brand's marketing with some compelling content that drives sales inquiries and brand awareness, just get in touch. Before our drinks evening on the 7th of July, IHM is running a series of virtual events, again as part of the Urban Living Festival. Full details are on your screen now. July also sees the return of the one and only Service Department Awards. Last year's event was probably the last time many of us were together face to face. So what better opportunity to reconnect? Have a look at this.
Hello, I'm George Sell, editor of Service Department News. We're here in London on a beautiful day. The city is coming back to life after a really hard year. Now, London is the venue for the Service Department Awards. Last year was the last time that the industry gathered together to celebrate, just before the first lockdown. And this year, we are going to be the first event where the industry gathers again. So there are 19 award categories for people, companies and buildings. You can enter as many categories as you like. There's no cost to enter. The entry deadline is April the 30th, and you can visit servicedepartmentawards.com to find out more and to submit your entries. So as ever, two of the categories, Industry Inspiration and Rising Star, are voted for by you, the Service Department News readers. So if you have any colleagues or friends in the industry that you would like to see recognised, then don't forget to submit your nominations. The awards are judged by an independent panel of industry experts made up of journalists, travel buyers, architects, designers, investors and service providers. So don't forget, June the 24th, live in person here in London, and the pubs will be open by then.
So make sure you got that date in your diary, 24th of June. And we look forward to seeing you all at the Millennium Gloucester in the Royal London Borough of Kensington. Now to the housekeeping protocols for this webinar. By using the chat and Q&A functions on your screens, you can send in questions and observations to our panel. These sessions work best when questions are asked so as we go along. So please get involved and we'll have a fantastic session. I'll be monitoring the feedback during the session, but apologies if it takes a couple of minutes to get to your question. So now it's time to ask our panel to introduce themselves, and we'll begin, please, ladies first with Vivi.
Thank you, Mark. Very happy to be here. I'm Vivi Chayari Himel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Altavita. We are a global corporate housing company, and our secret sauce is really the combination of global and live inventories with duty of care in mind, reducing a currently 48-hour request-based process down to just a few minutes with thoughtful, employee-friendly interface. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivi. And Tony next, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to chat today. People will know me as the CEO and the founder of Blue Orchid Hotels, and formerly the founder and managing director of Grange Hotels, both London hotel groups. I have ventured out into creating an all-suite product as well as hotels in the traditional sense. As a result of the COVID crisis, I've set up something called Central London Alliance, which is trying to nurture and encourage people back into London. Perhaps more about that later. I serve as a director on various business improvement districts, and I'm on the board of London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So thanks very much. Lots to talk about today, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity.
Thank you, Tony. And to Stephen next, please, Stephen Hansen.
Hi everyone. Stephen Hanson, President International Synergy. I didn't vote for the title. But previously with Seiko and with Bridge Street, Hyde Park residents, as little started off in service departments there. And prior to that, I was hotels with Marriott's and Holiday Inns. And I suppose my claim to fame is, if age is wisdom, then I must be one of the smartest people, one of the wisest people in the industry. If it isn't, then I'm not.
Thank you, Stephen. And Steve, please. Steve, will you unmute yourself, please?
It must have been my Liverpool shirt that made me go on mute. So yeah, I'm Steve Lowy. I'm CEO of Anglo Educational Services and the Residence Apartments. The Residence Apartments are corporate housing and luxury service apartments in central London. We have 4 locations. And Anglo Educational Services are a study abroad operator, mainly working with American students. And pre-COVID, we were looking after around 4,000 students a year in our housing, delivering academics, internship placements, and educational tours. Similar to Tony, I'm involved with the industry, and I sit on the Tourism Alliance as a board member, and also as chairman of the British Educational Travel Association. And thank you again for the invite.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to all of our panelists. As you've heard, there's a very, very strong slew today on the accommodation sector. That's what we're going to be focusing in on as we talk about out of adversity. Now, amongst the issues that our panel are going to be discussing over the course of the next 50 minutes is whether COVID has given our industry the opportunity to reset, and if so, what should change? What innovation will look like post-COVID? How important space will be in making travellers feel safe, and whether this gives the extended stay sector a real advantage over hotels, and whether the pandemic has changed investor attitudes and how that's going to manifest itself over the next 3 to 5 years. Just a little bit of context. This is what others are saying about this particular topic. McKinsey say prioritising innovation today is the key to unlocking post-crisis growth. And the Euromonitor Accelerating Travel Innovation After Coronavirus report, could have done with a catchier title, the industry needs to change to adapt to lower levels of demand. So let's now get into our session. And the first question I'm going to put to our panel, and I'm going to start with Tony here, is has the pandemic given the industry the opportunity to reset, and what needs to change, Tony?
It's an interesting question. Thanks, Mark. I'm not sure that we should be talking simply about opportunities. I think we need to put this in context. So just in a global context, this in terms of global business volumes is 10 times worse than the very worst of 2008 recession. That gives you an indication of how serious this is. As far as hospitality is concerned, of course, there's been a disproportionate effect on cities, particularly in my case, London. We are in hospitality, the UK's 4th largest employer, 3.2 million in direct jobs, 2.8 million in indirect jobs, that's 6 million. London disproportionately affected, as other cities and other capital cities have been. And in terms of GVA, gross value added, 75 billion directly, 87 billion indirectly. These are very big numbers that are unprecedented. So on the one case, there are opportunities to adapt, but I would say there's an imperative to adapt right now. So much less than an opportunity where we see windows of change, but actually I think that it's absolutely essential that the industry and hospitality starts providing in this, whatever the new norm is. What will they be in terms of the accommodations sector? Well, we have to look at our clients, and frankly, our clients' needs may have changed. Will people be coming back to workplace in the same volumes? Will the same patterns be there? Will international travel and events be the same? You know, there's a lot of uncertainties. I think that cities are resilient and that they will come back, but they won't come back without targeted support where they're being disproportionately affected. In terms of space, we perhaps can chat about that later. I'm sure other people have a view on it. There is a reason why I've developed an all-suite hotel, 275 suites. It's because I saw that there was a general trend towards apart hotels and all-suite, and generally in the UK, underserviced and with old stock. So I certainly put my money where my mouth is. And in terms of innovation, I've developed some systems which enable us to acquire our customers and to retain them in a way that we weren't able to in the last century. So that's quite enough for me, but there's lots to go through, and perhaps other people will chime in and we can get the conversation started. Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely. I'm going to bring in Stephen Hanson at this point. Stephen, by your own admission, you've spent plenty of time in this sector. How do you see this as whether there is an opportunity to reset, and your reaction to what Tony said there?
I entirely agree with Tony. I mean, it's not particularly news to us that space is an attractive commodity and that people are moving towards it. I mean, you only have to look at Airbnb's flotation. You know, they floated for 100 billion or something when they were valued at 36 billion and then went down to 18 billion. They pivoted and put a lot of business into 30-night plus stays, and they've been very successful at it. JFK once said that the word crisis in Chinese is composed of two characters. One represents danger and the other is opportunity. And I think this pandemic has thrown up a few dangers. As Tony mentioned, London has been devastated. If you happen to own a small guest house off the coast of Cornwall at the moment, then you're probably looking forward to a fairly good time. But I think there's been some major changes, generational changes of the way people work. So the industry will have to take account of that. So things like episodic travel. You know, I'm going to live in Florida now and work from there. Employees, project-orientated travel. So groups of employees coming together to travel for projects is a shift. And so there'll be many impacts of this on our sector. One's going to be the product. I think there'll be a rise in apart hotels, which is already the fastest growing area of the hospitality business. Length of stay will radically change, which is going to impact the product. Whether you're a hotelier or not hotelier, it's going to change how you manage your product. Supplier flexibility. I mean, the old ideas of cancellation charges X, Y, and Z. I think in the short term, we'll have to adapt because buyers do not want to suddenly find that the borders of Paris are closed and they've got to pay out for big group moves. So there needs to be flexibility built into the terms. Frequency of visits. I don't think it's any revelation to say that airlines are saying they're not looking at seeing 2019 numbers till 2025 at best, because people aren't going to be doing short-term business travel. They're going to be traveling for longer, so less and longer. And the other factor, which I think is rising in Europe, but hasn't been recognized necessarily in other parts of the world, is sustainability. I mean, what has this pandemic has shown is that we can all get on and work through our Zoom calls and our team calls, etc. And that has a big impact. So sustainability, I saw an IBM ITM report a few weeks ago, which says that sustainability is now the fourth biggest factor in buyer choice. So there's lots of changes, generational changes. So I entirely echo Tony's words.
I'm going to come to Vivi next before I ask Steve to enlighten us on what's happening within the youth education sector. But Vivi, in the light of what Tony and Stephen are saying, is there an opportunity to change what the legacy mindset?
Well, from our perspective, the crisis has given us a ton of opportunities, to be honest. It really leveled the playing field for smaller, innovative companies like Altavita. And we've been able to penetrate the legacy culture, the legacy mindset, all with the same tools. We no longer have to allocate a large marketing budgets, for example, to be able to educate our target audience to embrace technology. That said, I do concur with a lot of what Stephen and Tony said, and actually with the pandemic, investors would expect a lot of opportunities in distressed assets, but actually that window of opportunity never really came. There's a lot of money being fueled into the economy by the government. For example, interest rates are very low at the moment as well. So there has not been an opportunity for a lot of real estate investors to come in and really take advantage of usually what you would call the distressed value during a crisis.
Okay, and Steve, to bring you in then. So your business obviously straddles youth education and more conventional corporate travel. Can you give us a flavour for how you see this topic in the context of the markets that you serve?
Yeah, I mean, we're delighted to partner with some work with Vivian and also a lot with Stephen. And one of the big things that we've had feedback from buyers and agents for the corporate side is flexibility, and not just flexibility in booking terms, last minute postponements or cancellations. This is going to happen at the moment, but also flexibility in the product. You know, the ability if someone's traveling with children and they want to split their beds, if they want 2 desks in their apartment rather than 1, and just being able to act on that, given the restrictions of movement and still being able to service a client. I think we've actually done pretty well. And I think that's a strength of service apartments, is actually having run hotels and even backpackers hostels in the past. A lot of the products is quite rigid and inflexible, and actually with apartments there's great flexibility within that floor plan that you have, and I think that's a trend that will stay. There are what I call COVID babies. There are some short-term trends that are here because of the situation we're in, as opposed to things that are fundamental. But if someone is coming to London for work, being relocated, and the office is flexible, so they're only in the office 2 days a week, they want to work properly from their apartment, not off a kitchen table. And I think that's something that will be around for a long time. And even if you're here on a leisure trip, you might want to do a bit of work. So to have a proper desk will be really helpful. From the educational piece, we're actually quite lucky. We've got students here at the moment from the States, very small numbers, but they're having an amazing time. And obviously their CVs in the future, when they go for a job, what did you do through COVID? Oh, I stretched myself and went to the UK is pretty amazing story. We have done a lot of virtual internships and virtual educational programs, but from the 200 virtual interns we've worked with, 90% are still wanted to come to the UK for an in-person experience. And I think that is the reality. Those students will come for 3 to 4 months. And I think, as Stephen mentioned, you know, traveling less but traveling longer is something that will go throughout travel. And it may be, you know, more of a mix of domestic and international trips. So you may say, I'll have 1 long trip abroad, but 2 or 3 smaller breaks, city breaks in the UK for a bit. And you can see that with the American statistics of their domestic travel industry. They can't really travel anywhere at the moment, but they are traveling around the US trying to experience. So I think there has been innovation. I think some of it is short-term innovation just to get through to when things become a bit more normal. But I think there's definitely innovation that's happened that will be trends for the future, which lends itself very well to the service apartment space.
So the question now for all the panelists, and feel free, whichever one of you wants to comment on this first. So we've talked about perhaps there being an opportunity for change. Just how much can our industry affect change in light of the fact that what we cannot control are vaccination programs? There are several factors that as providers cannot be controlled. And which types of organization or cultures of organization do you think are best equipped to change? Who'd like to pick that up?
I'll go quickly. I think the inherent love of innovation is normally a corporate belief or mission statement or whatever. Obviously that has to be delivered. I think innovating for innovating's sake there's no point for that. It's innovating to make a process, a system, an experience better. And I think, as I've said before, some of it has been survival innovation. You had to do something different, otherwise you would have had zero revenue. And some of it is actually, this is a great opportunity to change the way we do things. And we've certainly done that, whether it was coming up quickly with a COVID cleaning policy, quite boring, but needed, or improving our communication systems, or sales process, or even facilities in a building. You know, that's fine. But I think there is massive opportunity. I think, you know, the franchise model, it may be more challenging because, you know, there's a lot of layers between the central innovation point and the operator, and whether they can afford to do that innovation physically or not. But there are quick wins that are there that everyone on the panel has, you know, done. Everyone's done stuff. You know, they haven't sat there and hibernated. They've tried to do things to get things going. And if you sit there and wait for it, if everyone on the panel sat and waited for business to come, it wasn't going to come. So I think everyone has done things in different ways. And, you know, much bigger companies than ourselves have also done cool things. But being small and nimble has been quite helpful for us.
Okay, let's bring the others in. Anyone got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. Very much agree with what Steve said. That communication aspect is key. From our perspective, it's really just being extra empathetic, thoughtful in the service that we deliver. We recently won the U.S. federal agency relocation contract, and we got it obviously because we have a very diversified portfolio of assets in the U.S. But actually, showing that thoughtfulness, delivering bespoke approach when we dissected the very complex U.S. federal mobility policies into a very simple, employee-friendly interface, so that they don't overspend their per diem allocation, for example, which is fascinatingly complex. I spent 3 hours reading it and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, but I wouldn't imagine that any federal employee would spend those hours and make sure that their per diem is not being overspent. So just showing that thoughtfulness, delivering bespoke services to the clients has been very, very well recognized in the industry from what we're seeing so far.
Okay, Tony or Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with much of what's been said, but I want to put it in a slightly wider context. So if we step back a bit, this crisis was foreseeable. Last night I went on to TED Talks and I could see people in 2007 talking about the next pandemic, how it was going to occur, where it was going to occur, the way it was going to occur, and what we need to do. And my fear would be that globally we're not responding to that adequately. For example, they're ripping up billions of ancient forest in Nepal to potentially build an airport that's not needed in that location, bringing man closer to animals, completely unnecessary, even in a pre-COVID world. If you want to know more about that, there's a documentary called Nijad. We'll tell you all about that. But the point is that the global world is turning its eyes to the sort of the micro, how we can manage ourselves right now, when actually we need to be thinking about sustainability, as Stephen mentioned, in a broader sense. Coming back to what Vivi said, and I agree with what she said about being thoughtful and creating bespoke solutions and empathy, and equally what Stephen said about being nimble and small and being able to adapt and to be flexible. But I think one of the things that this has taught us in this sort of very strange paradox is that whilst we are all individual, we're isolated, we're remote, our workers are in a different place, we're having to communicate with them and our customers and our potential customers in a different way. We are all now connected in this pandemic. From anybody in the world is now connected to somebody else. We've learned about that in the various stages, what's happening in Europe right now. We are connected. We can't survive and trade effectively unless everybody else is working on to the same agenda. So whilst there is this micro sort of insular view, we are all now part of a global concern. And actually what's going to get us out of it, it won't be just individual change, but it will be a collective, collaborative partnership view individually. And that's why I set up Central London Alliance, in order to bring an alliance of people together to have more weight than they could individually have on their own. The collective benefit and the individual benefit are actually coinciding. So I think that that's going to happen more. I think partnership and collaboration are going to be essential. People will be looking to other people to do things that perhaps they delivered on their own in the past. I think there'll be a different type of rep company that will be able to do that. Soft brands and so on probably they have to remodel. Are we capable of changing? I think that another lesson of a crisis, and this is just one of many, the most severe that I've experienced, is there are 4 stages. There's denial. We it's all too big and ugly and it doesn't impact me. If we remember back over a year ago, that's basically what people were saying, including our leaders. And then there was a period of hibernation. We're just going to wait it out and go quiet. That again is another action. Some people respond to that and they get creative and they get busy and they try and do things. Then there's a period of adjustment. And I would say that we are now still in a partial denial and we are now adjusting. And we haven't got to the 4th stage, which is recovery. And that's what we need to focus on, because whilst the numbers are ugly and the 60 billion loss in the UK hospitality in the last year, 88 million fewer visits just in one quarter 3 last year. These are big numbers, but actually there are positives. That 68% of people see hospitality as something they want to look forward to, and 55% see hospitality as being safer than in retail and other activities. So very broadly, I think that this has given us an opportunity to look at some sort of values. Vivi mentioned being empathetic and thoughtful and creating bespoke. Trust is the most important thing. We've learned that. Do we trust our leaders? Are we leading? Are we led by the science, following the science, guided by the science? Are we following what they do as leaders? And to be decent, fair, compassionate, clap for the NHS, look after your neighbour, be more compassionate, be more inclusive. These are sort of broader concepts that I think that hospitality has a reputation for being able to identify and deliver to its customers. So I see all of those things happening within a context of, and bringing back to Vivi's point about opportunity, distress does bring opportunities, but it is distress. And that means that lots of jobs, lots of lives, lots of livelihoods have been impacted by this. And there's going to be some interesting questions to ask of our funders and investors and banks. Who will they fund somebody who wants to take the chance with an opportunistic purchase, or will they support people who are in the doldrums with no real hope for a period of recovery? I mean, that's a question that perhaps other people might want to join into. But yeah, there are optimistic signs, and we can take advantage of them.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to come to Stephen now. Tony's just mentioned there, clearly there's been a substantial number of job losses in our sector over the course of the last year, which in turn is likely to lead to more and more startups. But the pandemic, I think it's fair to say, has also been something of a leveler between bigger and smaller providers, because you can't actually go and see all your customers. A lot of the engagement has leveled the playing field. How do you see this question of going forward, picking up on Tony's points, and whether actually the bigger or smaller suppliers are better equipped going forward?
Well, first of all, I should say apologies for being slightly reticent on this call so far, but I'm a bit disturbed by Steve's background as an Everton season ticket holder.
I concur with that, and I'm just going to add, if I might interject, when Mark mentioned where the next event is in June, he mentioned the Royal Borough of Kensington, but of course he forgot to mention Chelsea. I think I want to correct him and to reiterate that Chelsea is very important in life.
Other football clubs are available. Carry on.
To your point, smaller or bigger, well, it's quite hard to say at the moment because it's very difficult to sort of engage with your clients direct. But I think there's an opportunity for both. I see on one side, the buyers will gravitate towards brands that they trust. And so there might be less risk. So you could see certain hotels, brands doing quite well because they're going to be able to prove, there will be a demand from the buyers to prove delivery, prove that your apartments are sanitized, or your hotel room is sanitized, or your airline is sanitized. So I think there'll be a movement by corporate buyers and by individuals to go towards brands that they trust. But at the same time, I think, you know, we talked about innovation. I think companies like Viva's, you know, starting up small, they have an opportunity to, you know, they're in a speedboat, so they can move around, they can turn quicker, they can adjust quicker. So obviously there's going to be opportunity for both. I think what will really happen though is you've got Darwinism going on, as you know, Charles himself said. It's not the strongest or the most intelligent, it's the most adaptable to change. So anyone who is setting their business model on being lazy and narrow-minded is probably in for a tough post-COVID. So I think it's all about innovation. I very much like Steve's point about culture. You know, we've actually taken this opportunity to look at our vision and values and reset our vision and values, because, you know, as there's a social change going on, which we need, you know, as operators, as businesses, we're now operating in a much more probably politicized world than we were a couple of years ago. So that's why I say things like sustainability will have an impact, how we're traveling. So those make radical differences on choice. So I think we need to be very open-minded, whether we're a large company or a small company. I think there's going to be opportunities, and those opportunities are going to close. The door will be firmly shut on anyone who's a bit narrow-minded at the moment. Okay,
let's now move to what innovation is going to look like when we do achieve and move towards the recovery period. And I'll open this to all of you, to whoever would like to go first. What do you see innovation looking like? What examples excite you going forward? And within that point, the fact that face-to-face engagement is tougher and has been for the last year, does that actually mean there may well be less innovation? And I'm also interested in bringing out how the long-term impact of working from home or working from anywhere will impact providers in product design and delivery. So broad question in and around innovation. What does it look like? Who'd like to go first?
I'm quite happy to go first on that. I mean, it could be said that hospitality, and particularly people who design and build and operate hotels, are investing in bricks and mortar. Not easy to change tack, as Stephen has suggested, when all your money is invested in bricks and are hoping to nudge people back into accommodation for them. But actually, the hospitality sector has been innovative, and if I just take my own case, I've invested very heavily in a CRM product, because I realize that I need to acquire my customers in a different way to retain them. I want to have all my data in one place. If my staff are now located in all kinds of different places, including 27 different countries, I want them to be able to access material, to be able to contact them, communicate with them in a different way than I was perhaps in face-to-face meetings with global travel managers and business travel consultancies and doing presentations in an old way. So what I've done is I've taken the bull by the horns, as rather like Stephen said, and we've had to adapt. We had to adapt that model. I've invested in a CRM tool called Optimizer, and if one looks at what Salesforce have done, and the big towers that they've got in the city, and the financial world, I think they're darlings, because they're working with data. And the reality is that if I were to buy a hotel tomorrow, and the previous owners had removed the beds, turned off all the utilities, sacked all the staff, and removed all the stock, I reckon I'd probably be able to get it back and up and running within a week. New utility company, new agency staff perhaps, buy my stock in, replace the beds. I think I could do that. If they took away my data and I didn't know who my customers were, when they were going to come, what the pattern of business was, what volumes, what rates, what contracts existed, where the future lay, did I have conferences or weddings, whether weekends are busy or not, I would not be able to recover from that for a very long time. So I think that just sort of emphasizes, even in our bricks and mortar world, that data and the use of our data and the way in which we connect and collaborate and utilize it, aggregate it, and use other people to perhaps enable us to enhance it, like Optimizer. I think that that is probably the way that the world has now adapted in one sense to hospitality, because we can't provide initially the face-to-face contact and even the telephone contact when people are furloughed. And that's all about the flexibility, proving and trust. In that collaboration, I'll just mention Central London Alliance once more, because it's an alliance of anybody in Central London. Stephen knows about that. But where individual organisations would find it hard to do a risk assessment, and they perhaps would join Central London Alliance that can provide you with a risk assessment. You can download it. You can have Bureau Veritas validate it. And even individual organisations can now get access to things that the big companies can't by virtue of these partnerships and collaborations.
Okay, let me bring in some of the other panelists now for your thoughts on practical examples of innovation. Who'd like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I can say it from us, from an operator's perspective, we're starting to get opportunities for new buildings, which is exciting. And we don't look at it as this building is just for corporate, and I think that flexibility of product is essential. COVID 2025, hopefully we're prepared. You may have to shift your business model. And we used this time last year to go from 2 or 3 revenue streams across our student apartments and our corporate apartments to probably about 10 or 12 different revenue streams: direct, agents, corporate buyers, relocation companies, and there's so much there, and very much similar to Tony's, understanding your business, understanding your market, which when I ran hotels or hostels was almost easier because we're a budget hotel or a backpackers hostel. We've got quite a defined market and a market within it. So I think, as we're looking to recover and add new products to the mix, it's, if something bad were to happen and borders were shut, what other uses could this building have, rather than this will only work for this one market. And I think, for one of the questions before was about investors, is that investors, when we've spoken to them, or landlords, are increasingly interested in what you're going to do with a building rather than just getting that rent. And I think we're also coming up against landlords who want pre-COVID level rent. We can't afford it. No one can. And if they're going to get someone who does, they may go bust in a year. The reality is you need to have a very flexible business model to be able to be nimble and change, and a product to match, which, as Tony said, if you've got a cookie cutter hotel, it can be really tough because there's only so much you can do. But there is opportunity going forward for that, and I think that's how demand will be. We have students staying in studios in our corporate building, paying quite a large rent a week because they wanted their own cocoon to study in rather than a PBSA. We've also had corporates who want to stay in some cheaper flats because their company can't afford the higher rate. So that flexibility is very important, and a consistency of delivery to work with the larger brands. So
Vivi, can I bring you in at this point, and then I'll come to Stephen?
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree. This is what we're seeing a lot as well. There is a big rise in demand for flexible assets, driven by the remote work from home becoming to work from anywhere trend. From our recent Altavita Innovation Summit with 400 delegates, we did a survey, and the result was very clear. 69% wanted a monthly flexible rental, 24% wanted a weekly rental, with very, very few percentages wanting that longer term leases nowadays. The other trend that we're seeing as well is that a lot of people want to move into ready to move in homes. So we're seeing less and less demand of longer lease where you move with your furniture, but rather kind of like a ready to move in apartment. You don't want to call utility companies or make sure your Wi-Fi is working anymore or not. And the third trend we are seeing very strong is that the fall in demand for hotel rooms, like one studio hotel room is undeniable, and therefore a lot of asset operators are looking at some modular construction techniques, how to seamlessly convert a 1-bedroom apartment into a 3-bedroom and vice versa, so that they can enhance their utilization rate, the yield rate, so on and so forth. So very much in line with what Steve was saying. But in terms of concrete innovation from our side, from Alta Vita, where we really operate in corporate housing, serving Fortune 1000 companies, there are still a lot of opportunities there. From what we're seeing, the processes are still very manual. My co-founder Carolina and I, we were just on a call with one of the top 20 Fortune 1000 companies on Monday, and we were very surprised that their processes is still very manual. They have to do a lot of the hard work in collecting housing options, re-PDFing, emailing, rebranding, so on and so forth. So from our perspective, the opportunity is there for digital transformation on the B2B side. It's not a difficult rocket science technology. It's really just, again, going back to being thoughtful, structured, using technology in such a way that we can serve employees better. The other problem we're seeing quite often is that when we speak to travel buyers, we speak to the corporates, they're not the users. So there is a lot of disconnect there. And meanwhile, when we hear industry speakers talk about employee experience, it's always at the forefront of everything. However, the employees are not actually enjoying the benefits of it all. So I would really challenge the industry to include employees when talking about employee experience, and therefore streamlining the processes so that their anchor, which is temporary housing or accommodation, is there, is reliable, and let's also bring back that sexy aspect of hospitality again to the industry.
So moving to Stephen, can we make hospitality sexy again?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we wouldn't be in if it wasn't a sexy industry anyway in the first place. But there was, your first question was on practical examples of innovation, and a recent McKinsey report said that 90% of executives interviewed say that the crisis will change the way that they do business. But McKinsey said that innovation as a top 2 priority had shifted down from 55% to 23%. So in other words, know that there's that much innovation going on in the middle of a hurricane. I think people are preparing, they're observing, they're figuring out what to do, but at the moment they're surviving. So I think the great push on innovation is still to come. And I think there's a lot of, as I said before, social changes that are taking place. The obvious one, clear examples, is going to be 2 bedrooms instead of 1 bedroom, make a 2nd bedroom into an office. Is going to be a stronger element. Service departments or apart hotels, for instance, and I've been involved in quite a few of them. The finance guys squeezed the room size, so they were going to be 38 square meters, then they went to 35, then they went to 32, and ended up at 23 or something. So in other words, it became fat hotel rooms. Yeah. And I think there'll be a push back on that into more space and more working apartments. So there'll be a physical change in the product. Another thing, the kind of things that you innovate in is talked about proof. How do you know your apartment is clean? So we're introducing an automated inspection, automated through a telephone inspection report, which is downloaded and you report on. Nothing new about that. It's been in hotels for years, but putting it into a supply chain across the world in multiple languages, that's new. So that's an innovative way of how we've sort of responded to it. But also, at the end of the day, just as Viva was just saying, end user, well, I think the other element in this is wellness is becoming a focal point. So we're going to have a surge in mental health issues related to work. And what we're experiencing is the clients would like to get people back into the office, but the people don't really want to go back into the office just yet. What's the office going to look like? How's it going to feel? So this rises tensions. There's a rising tension that you can feel in the world at the moment. And you don't have to go very far in the papers before you can see this being played out in many, many instances. But in our world, where it's impacting is stress levels are starting to rise. So my I don't know, kettle doesn't work. That's the worst thing that's ever happened ever in the world. And then that rises up the chain, escalates very quickly. So as well as innovation, I think we've also got to keep in touch with just basic concentration on people, on human beings. So that's why we're in the hospitality business. And that's why I say the hospitality business has always been a sexy business, because it's a keeping industry. Therefore, what we've done, and I'm sure many others alongside us have done, have really focused on training. We've done more training in the last year than we've probably done in the previous 3 years, because we've got to train people to adjust to the fact that people have shorter tempers than they had. They need quicker answers. So technology innovation will come through, provide data, as Tony was talking about, so you can make better judgments. Everything's got to be more simpler, more easier. But people are people at the end of the day. And so what I would sort of urge our industry to do is to keep concentrating on the people, as well as seeking to innovate and build rocket ships.
Stephen, just to add on that, like what I've noticed, and obviously running a company much smaller, but everyone has dealt with this very differently. And people who are outgoing have become introverted, and people who are introverted actually love working from home and become more outgoing because they've got the structure around. And I think where the larger companies have more fixed training programs and well-being programs and whatever, now it's almost a very individual way of managing people and getting the heads of department to then manage those people to make sure that everyone is okay as much as we can. And you know, I was very conscious of that pre-COVID and pre-lockdown, so I knew it was going to happen. I think we all did a week beforehand, and it was like, right, okay, it's fine giving everyone computers to work from home, but is that going to actually work? And so all of that soft side of management, which I think hospitality is actually very good at, because we are a people industry, will come to the fore, and that employee engagement and support, and even what we have found is supporting our guests who are there. We've started doing free personal training sessions if people are staying a longer time. I'm at the process of writing a cookbook, but we did it for the students, and it worked really well, just so people felt that they went on their own. And I think that tension you're talking about is real, it's global, and it'll be different in every country, and it'll a lot be down to what the governments say in terms of, yeah, we'd like you to go back to the office. Unlike what happened in London last year, was Boris said, oh, go back to the office, and then within an hour it's like, oh, well, no, maybe you shouldn't. And that doesn't help, because that creates more anxiety, and anxiety is probably the biggest problem that employees and people generally are experiencing at the moment, is the fear of the unknown. But yeah, I really concur with that.
I'd like to bring Tony back in at this point. So Tony, specifically on the whole issue of managing and training and developing people, your businesses employ a substantial number of people. How have you adapted to the new environment, and what are your sort of plans have you changed anything in that respect?
Yeah, we've had to. I mean, one of the interesting things about our business is that we didn't close our hotels. And so whilst, you know, and I set up some organizations. Here to Help London was one in the first iteration on the first lockdown. And a lot of our staff volunteered, and they could understand how they could work with other people on the same basis. That teamwork was really useful, whether we're delivering things, picking up things up from pharmacies, whether we're now working in the kitchens, whatever it was they were doing. We did about 5,000 room nights and about 30,000 meals in lockdown one, to largely NHS people, the blue lights, people who were stuck and stranded, and so on. So I think that really took me back to a long time ago when we were, you know, building hotels, and all the management team and the other people who were trainees all took to the brooms, literally, and were carting furniture up into the new buildings, and that generated a team spirit that lasted for careers. There's some people still with me now, 20 odd years on. The average length of stay of some of my the people who've been with me are certainly more than a decade. So I think you can't buy that. You know, you need to create that, and I think this has given an opportunity for us to engage with our people in a different way, and even if they've been doing a different role, fulfilling a different task. Right now, I've got a number of people who have volunteered of their own accord to be in the office and help Central London, because they realise that you know, as an individual business, we are nowhere unless the attractions and the museums and the theatres and people are back to workplace, unless we can get that rich tapestry of life, so the cobbler and the dry cleaner and everybody else is prepared to not just open on the 12th, but to stay open because there is footfall. Unless we can do that together, then actually we have reduced opportunities for our employees. And I know that, for example, legal firms that have been taking on interns or trainees a year ago, some of those people have never seen an office. They've done a year of training and they have not yet met their colleagues. And you know, most of their colleagues don't know what they look like. So you know, that's not going to be easy in a hospitality setting. But just to come back on the last couple of points, that values are going to be important, and this was an opportunity, as Stephen said, to look at values. I think in the same way, if we look at our narrow vision of the values of our own business, as Stephen said, he re-looked at the values of his business. I think that UK PLC has had to do that. We were, you know, punching above our weight, I would say, in terms of soft power. We'd maintained and built that over a long time. Perhaps Brexit, you know, didn't do us that much positive in that. The way in which we treated the pandemic in the early stages, you know, probably diminished our reputation globally. That's now being restored. And the global Britain is what we need as an industry, as a sector, for the travel and tourism and hospitality sector to be prosperous. We need our leaders to be trusted. We need, as an industry, to be trusted. We need to be shown to be decent and fair and compassionate and inclusive as a nation, rather than building walls, build bridges instead. And I think that applies from our nationhood and the way in which our countries treat each other, but also how businesses work with each other and how our employees and our leaders in our individual organizations work with each other. So that sort of put it on 3 tiers, but they're all connected. And as I said at the start, that we're all interconnected now and interrelated and interdependent in a way that we've never really realized before.
Thank you, Tony. We've only got a few minutes left. There's a couple of points I want to cover. In a little while, I'm just going to come to getting your thoughts on whether the pandemic will have impacted investor attitudes. But before we do that, without understating in any way the human tragedy of the pandemic, will history look back on this time and say that actually COVID-19 was the making of the extended stay sector? Who'd appreciate your thoughts on that, panel, please?
As someone who's been in it for about 100 years, what amazes me, every time there's an issue which hits the hospitality industry, the extended stay sector comes out strongly. So it's like going into the sea in Cornwall. You know, you dive under the first wave, then you get up, then you dive under the second wave. So I think yes is a short answer to that, and the stats show it. Service departments, apart hotels, are doing well, relatively speaking, in this industry. It's the world's biggest, as Tony said, we didn't quite use these words, world's biggest shitstorm basically for the last 100 years, and the service departments are surviving. They're doing well, and they'll strengthen coming out. So, short answer, yes.
Thank you. Brief answers, please, ladies and gentlemen. Who'd like to go next?
I agree. I think it is. I think what will happen is that, as Vivi said, in terms of assets, I think it will just evolve. And it'll probably evolve quicker, like some of the other trends that have happened. It will push the change and the growth in it, and yeah, I think it's pretty exciting.
Vivi?
Yeah, I definitely is a yes. I just wanted to bring one other point that we are seeing quite a lot now is the rise in this professional employer organization or employer on record, so PEO, EOR companies who are essentially helping smaller companies, startups, scaling up startups to employ globally distributed employees around the world, and so that they are able to have the licenses to operate, to be able to legally operate within the jurisdictions of their residences, and we think that is another driving factor in the industry right now for extended stay.
Okay, and Tony, I'm going to ask, Tony, with your answer, we've had a question in from Janice Millen of Dexter Moore and Associates. Please ask Tony how people can get involved in the Central London Alliance to help make a difference and bring people back to town. So perhaps a short answer on the first point, Tony, and then in a couple of minutes on the second.
Okay, very good. So thank you from Dexter Moran. So the in the first thing, there's no doubt that there's going to be a movement, a continued movement, perhaps an increased accelerated movement towards extended stay, all suite, apart hotels. That was a trend that was already established. We can look across the pond and see that was happening. It will happen probably at a faster rate. But I put a caveat, two caveats. One, we've got to listen to our Chancellor of the Exchequer when he's saying that we now need to be productive and return to work when it's safe. And some of the leaders in industry are doing that. And secondly, that the support and the proportionate support to industry sectors and locations needs to continue, because what I fear is that when the landlord and tenant issues start to come unraveled, we will need the banks and the government to be supportive. So, you know, there is still that discussion where the tenants haven't been paying their landlords for the last 12 or 15 months. The landlords can't do anything about it yet, but when they do, they will probably be pushed into that because their financiers are going to be saying, well, you haven't paid us, you've broken your covenants, we need payback. You've got to get, if you're not got it from your tenants, then we're going to be coming after you. So there's got to be a sensible, mature discussion with government, with local authorities, with businesses, with finance, in order to enable us to recover. Coming back to the Central London Alliance, just go on to centrallondonalliance.com. You can join as an advocate, it doesn't cost you anything, or a brand partner if you want to get involved at that level, or a business supporter, like people like Bureau Veritas. The brand partners typically are business improvement districts, London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and a number of media partners, and business supporters are there too. And as an advocate, any business or individual can join as an advocate, and they can get free access to risk assessments. And what's more, later today, look out for London Love Affair, which is the brand of the consumer campaign that we're pushing out today. And there's a toolkit you can download. You can put it on your headings. You can use it on your website. It's been bought and paid for. Any business that loves London, wants to engage, or just loves the fact that the city should thrive and be an economic regenerator for the UK, I urge them to get on and download it. It doesn't cost anybody anything, and that's part of the collaborative effort of a number of people that have put a lot of time and effort and investment into bringing back London, which will stimulate activity elsewhere in the country, and we can contribute to the NHS and the other services because we are the economic muscle for UK.
Great stuff. Thank you, Tony. Well, we are virtually out of time, but I do have time for one final question. I'm not going to ask the one about investors because that I think will take us over time. I'm going to ask each of our panelists for one thing, their one wish for the next 6 months, not long term, one wish relevant to our sector for the next 6 months. And I'm going to start very unfairly with Steve.
With the Global Travel Task Force, when they announced this traffic light system, that it's clear and globally translated around the world to allow international travel to resume. So just a very, very clear government plan on international travel.
Thank you. Vivi.
There was an accelerated adoption for many technologies during the pandemic. So when the world goes back to normal, let's not lose sight and make sure we're keeping the same momentum there.
Stephen.
Engagement. Make sure you're engaged with all your people, and make sure that you yourself are engaging with the sectors. I'm involved in the advisory boards with GBTA and with ASAP, and the only way that we'll influence government is by making sure that we're engaged and working.
Okay. And Tony.
A few things. Excuse me for spluttering. I think remember the values and one of those things that we've learned through this pandemic. And I think that the government and other organisations have got to look at cities and value them rather than the levelling up agenda and the Build Back Better ignoring the cities where there is economic growth, but equally hardship and a disproportionate impact, that support needs to continue for a while until international travel can continue, as Stephen said.
Thank you, Tony. We are, ladies and gentlemen, now out of time, so I must just thank our superb panel. It's been my absolute privilege to host today's webinar, and to Vivi and to Tony, to Stephen and to Steve, thank you so much. Just a couple of more commercials before we go. We would just like to acknowledge and thank the sponsors for the Urban Living Festival, all of whom are on your screen now, together with an unparalleled lineup of media partners, more media partners than you can shake a stick at. So if anyone is interested in becoming involved with the IHM events, please contact the one and only Katie, and she will be delighted to take your call or receive your email. All that remains for me is to thank all of you for your attendance. I hope you found this and our other TIN and IHM Engage seminars to be beneficial. And if we can help you with any form of content going forward, please get in touch. Have a great day, everybody, and good luck.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, chaps. Brilliant. Well done. Thank you.